It is my privilege and honor to welcome Tony Battle, CIO of Shell Energy Retail, into a live discussion on the future of retail. Without giving away too much just yet, Tony has a long history, a long interesting career, which we'll get into, leading up to his current stint as the CIO. Tony is tasked with growing Shell's footprint in energy retail within two major European markets, UK and Germany. Tony, welcome, and we appreciate you spending your time with our extended PUG community today.
Hey, thanks, Samant. Really nice to be here, and it's a privilege to be part of this event. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Of course, glad to have you. Tony, I want to first pick off of, we thank you for doing the video for the plenary. So I want to kind of go back to some of the comments you made there and start off with the first question. You have an interesting career over the last 20 plus years, delivering on mega projects, and you've had a customer-centric focus for the most part. I also understand you have a lot of history and background in the upstream side. Now you're in retail, where customer centricity is the focus pretty much. So I'm curious how your perspective has changed from when you were dealing with a different part of the industry, whereas now it's retail.
It's a great question. Yeah, I've had to learn how to be customer centric. I think that's probably the biggest sort of self-awareness and takeaway. And I think in some ways, my journey, most latterly in the last few years of my career, is in some ways indicative of the transition that this industry is having to take and the journey that it's going on. You're absolutely right, Samant. My early part of my career was absolutely in upstream, in large mega program capital projects, delivering onshore and offshore facilities from an engineering perspective. And my background is that I studied engineering surveying because I wanted to be a cartographer, but I wanted to understand the process of capturing data and the whole mechanics about how you measure the world and then transpose that into 2D and 3D. And that's absolutely what I started out to do. I didn't intend to go into the energy industry, but like a lot of us, I probably ended up there by, a journey of, taking different jobs and different career opportunities. But I found myself, when I left university, working as a surveyor, a topographic and engineering surveyor, at a time when that industry was absolutely going through what I call the first phase of digitalization. Survey crews, multi-person survey crews were no longer needed because one man could do the same job as previous with an automated total station or, intelligent instrumentation. And that took me on a journey of having to move from being a surveyor and capturing data to managing hardware and systems and generating information, which led me into information technology. And I spent the best part of the last 20 years working in upstream in large budget capital programs, from a concept phase all the way through to operations, principally around utilization of geospatial technologies and so on, in a very, very privileged position, in a very, very privileged industry with lots of money. And when we talk about customer centricity, I would put my hand up and say, no idea what that meant for all of that period of time. In fact, I probably even struggled, like a lot of people do, to actually comprehend and articulate what it meant to be close to the bottom line in that part of the industry, because you're so far removed from the sort of the retail side of things. However, saying that, I've been really privileged in Shell in being able to transition out of upstream into downstream and retail. And for the last few years, I helped Shell's retail business try and transition towards data-centric and customer-centric ways of working. And it's probably in that period that I've had to reform and reshape myself a little bit about what I understand customer centricity to be. I'm a consumer like what you are, and everybody will be on this call, and we all want value, we all want great service, we all want the things that we want at any given moment in time. And being in Shell Retail really afforded me the opportunity to truly understand that, particularly around the non-fuel retail piece, which is a hugely competitive space. We all like to grab a coffee when we're on the road. Sometimes we get hungry. We like the convenience of being able to pop in somewhere and grab some groceries and things like that. And that's absolutely the space where true customer centricity comes to play. And in the last year, I've moved into a slightly different part of Shell's business, which again, I think reflects the transformation that this industry is in. So I now sit in the renewables energies solutions part of Shell, which is absolutely a retail focused entity, but sits in upstream, which in some ways I think reflects the change and the dynamic of this industry as it transforms and changes.
Yeah.
There's no hard and fast playbook in terms of how we do these things. So again, I'm in retail, but I'm back in upstream, which is a bit unusual. And I'm in a part of the business which is very new to Shell, but again reflects the transformation and the need to move towards a different energy model. I'm in a part of the business where Shell delivers electricity and gas and broadband and other services to domestic consumers. So basically, it's the things that you need at home to power your home and also power your car. And again, that's taught me a whole new range of dynamics about a completely different market. It's very low margin, very heavily regulated, hugely competitive, and it's taught me, or it's consolidated for me the attention to detail about understanding the needs of the customers. What is it that they actually need? What do they ask for? What can they get from us that they can't get from our competitors in a market where they can switch? I can move to another energy supplier because it's got a cheaper tariff, and that's the name of the game. So the differentiator for us around customer centricity is about how we truly understand what customers need, how we transpose that into user experience and services, and how we utilize the data that we get by virtue of doing all that to get speed to market and quick to response to the customer, and ultimately demonstrate that we care for the customer and we give them what they want.
I want to pick up on one thread that you just mentioned, which I've been thinking about as we've been talking about the last few weeks in preparing for this session. We talk a lot about digital twin, as I talked about today. And in the work that as I'm absorbing the work that you're doing, I'm curious if you see in this retail space actually, let's back up. In the upstream space, we talk about assets as the starting point for a digital twin. And then you layer your IoT SCADA data on top of it, making it a living system, if you will. As I'm thinking about retail, it's us as humans or your assets, basically. And it's data about us that you're after to understand your customer behavior, customer profile, and things of that nature. What is your sense of digital twin, or is there even something called as a digital twin in this space, or what is the equivalent to that?
It's a great question. It's a really thought-provoking question, actually. I think the concept of a digital twin using that vocabulary isn't necessarily there yet. But I think the concept and the value proposition about taking what is effectively real-time data and putting it somewhere almost like a master data library where you can do secondary and tertiary analytics and create further insights outside of that real-time space it is absolutely a concept and a must-have. and I think that's very much a developing space, actually. So, you talk about people being the assets, absolutely, and that goes all the way back to customer centricity. They are the assets that we need to encourage to join us as a retailer, and we need to nurture them, we need to care for them, and we need to make sure that they don't disappear. Um, and but we have to find the mechanisms for sensing what it is that, as assets, they do. So where do they go? Absolutely a location-based thing. When they're at those locations, what do they consume? So you can assume a location is a retail site, let's say a gas station. It's going to be diesel, it's going to be petrol. Increasingly, it's going to be electricity. Particularly in that electricity scenario, you can assume that your asset is going to be on site for longer, so they're potentially going to consume other things, hopefully in the shop. So we have to sense and be able to collect data about what happens with those assets in those locations. Equally, we can assume that between those locations, and I'm talking specifically about mobility here, but there's also some kind of a consumption or some kind of a service offering that equally produces data. And let's assume that those customers or those assets are also consumers of energy at home, and they've got a location in terms of where they live, be it an apartment or a house, or maybe even a B2B scenario where they are an industrial or commercial consumer of energy, because we do both B2C and B2B. And we're also in a position where we want to capture data about those assets in those locations. And fundamentally, where we want to get to is the same aspiration that you could assume Amazon or Google or Apple would have about their assets, about their consumers, which is about being able to understand and marry up and amalgamate all that data from all of those sensors, be it, in our case, a retail site or a home or a business location. Because fundamentally, mapping that together allows us to get real insights about the individual or the business and the consumption and the needs and the behaviors, predominantly around location. And I think we need to do a lot of analytics and insights and interpretation in real time. But equally, I think there's a value, and getting back to the digital twin concept, there's a value about having a master data library that is also somewhere else that allows us to do deeper and different types of analytics.
That's a perfect segue into what I wanted to ask you about next, and which is about data. Shell is a global organization, and here we're talking data about human behavior, customer profiling, and in today's world, as data crosses borders, do you see any challenges? What is Shell's perspective on, data across borders, working in different countries? Are there challenges you're seeing in that phase, in that sense, and how are you addressing them?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Shell is truly a global organization, and as we try and transition as per the energy change, we want to do that across all the continents which we operate in. And your point about different markets presenting maybe different challenges is often a consequence of localized market needs, preferences, cultural differences, but also regulatory constraints. So you can assume that in some countries you can't necessarily realize the kind of ambition that I just talked about in answer to the last question of bringing disparate data sets together and amalgamating them so that you get a broad view of an individual customer, particularly in terms of location, in terms of movement. In some markets, there's constraint and restriction about the ability to be able to do that. From a broad vision, it would be a fantastic thing to be able to amalgamate data around consumers or individual consumers or commercial consumers on a global scale. So let's say you as an individual, you took a vacation and you went to Canada, or you went to Mexico, or even further south into South America. Potentially, as a Shell customer, you might also continue to consume services in a retail capacity whilst you're on your vacation or whilst you're traveling. And it would be really opportune for us to be able to understand that and marry that up as part of our bigger picture about you as a consumer, so that we know in those locations you've got preferences and that you've made transactions, and we start to develop that insight relative to the intent, that we can understand you and then maybe offer you additional services and actual propositions, which again is very much about customer centricity. And again, a very, very different space to where I was in upstream for the best part of 20 years, and probably where the majority of this industry still is.
Interesting. We're seeing a lot of fast-paced changes today. And as we were talking about, a couple of weeks ago, what is your advice or suggestion for a geospatial professional, a true geospatial professional that's out there and considering kind of diversifying into this space? Because we see that, as I mentioned earlier, it's an ecosystem approach to technology today, and you got to wear different hats at different times, and you got to be versatile. So, having been in the industry, having started as a geometician yourself 20 years ago, and to see where you are now, and you're in this driver's seat of looking forward with your work at Shell, but you also have the luxury of looking back your own career over the last 20 years. What would be your advice to somebody that's looking at you right now?
Yeah, I'm hugely passionate about this topic, particularly because I've been, as you say, in that geospatial fraternity, and I've evolved, and I knew I had a self-awareness and a consciousness that I probably had to evolve in order to sustain a career, because I could see the industry changing around me. And I think what it's taught me is that there's so much opportunity and so much potential for geospatial professionals to add value outside of what they maybe perceive are the boundaries of the career. And I think that is as true today as it ever was, increasingly actually, in the sense that everything is about data. We are here together today because we're fundamentally in and around Esri technology, but I truly believe that the whole future of data is actually agnostic of any particular technology. Particularly in a retail space, data is the lifeblood of what we do, and there's so much necessity for capability, data scientists, analysts, individuals that truly understand the power of data, working with big data, complex data sets. And so much of that is about location. And I think there's a real gap in the capability within the sort of data scientist science world that I experience today, in terms of transformation, coordinate systems, projection relative to accuracy and positioning. And I'm sure everybody on the call here will have deep experience about the consequences of what happens when a position is transformed incorrectly, when coordinates are misquoted, the wrong projection system is utilized. And in a world now where data and location are fundamental to all of the things that we've been talking about in the last 10 to 15 minutes, the need for understanding, appreciation, and care and attention for location has to happen from somewhere. And I think there's a great opportunity for geospatial professionals to be filling that gap.
Related to that topic, the intersection of business and technology, and we can bring the rest of the panel in a couple of minutes here. There's always this clear boundary wall, it seems like, between business and technology, and where GIS sits, sometimes under IT, sometimes in business. How do you see that changing or evolving at Shell, or just your perspective in the industry? Do you have like a preference of how things geospatially should be organized within organizations, thereby perhaps providing more opportunities, more diverse opportunities for geospatial professionals along those lines?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I have to reflect on, where the 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 core of the geospatial community sit within Shell, and it's still principally within a geomatics world. And I was chatting to some of my geomatics colleagues in Shell a couple of weeks ago, Bart and Robert. They might be on the call, not sure, but and we were talking about this challenge, about how geospatial GIS usage seems to still be confined or tagged to a geomatics community, a survey community, principally in upstream, and yet outside of upstream, even within upstream, but outside of upstream, definitely in downstream, there's so much opportunity, there's so much potential and scope for geospatial data, integration of data and systems with non-spatial technologies. And as we've just talked about, the opportunities for individuals. Somehow we need to pioneer and expand that universe outside of, with no disrespect to the geomaticians, but there's so much play there, and so much education that needs to be applied. And in some ways, I hold a passion for it, and I feel, as I'm sure many people do, that I want to give something back. So,
Mm-hmm.
I've taken a journey which is, I'm still a geomatician at heart, but it's taken me somewhere else. And because I'm still a geomatician at heart, and because I can still empathize with how difficult it can be if you are in an energy company, maybe trapped in upstream, but there's a lot of opportunities, but boundaries. I want to be able to facilitate that a little bit. And if I can raise awareness and help people on their careers in thinking that there is the scope and the potential to step out of what they think is the boundary and
Yeah.
realize something else, that would be a great achievement.